All right, here we go. Officially starting our unit on natural systems. So if you remember when I introduced the class, I said we would talk about nature and how the world works, and then we'll talk about people, and then really the focus is how are nature and people interacting. So um, this time when you're taking notes, all the slides that have this blue box that says required are things that you should know. Not a whole lot to write down, just a general overview of what's going on in our environment. So this page is required. First of all, how is our world organized for life? We start with one organism, so one deer, one human, one bacteria cell. And then if you put a bunch of those organisms together in a certain area, we call that a population. So the definition of a population are all the organisms of one species in the same area at the same time. And this part right here, in the same area at the same time, is important because, for example, the population of our school building changes all the time. At 8:30 in the morning on these hybrid days, there's probably 700, 800 people in the building. And at midnight, there's probably 2 people in the building. We do have custodians that work overnight. So you have to define the area and you have to define the time. And we are talking about counting one species. So then again, what makes a species? In order to be a species, you have to be able to make a baby that is viable, which means that baby will live and that baby can reproduce. For example, a donkey and a horse can make a baby. We call that baby a mule, but a mule cannot make a child on its own or with another mule. So they're infertile. So donkey and horse are not in the same species because even though they can reproduce, they cannot make a viable offspring. So we have organisms, we count those organisms as a population. When a bunch of populations get together, we call that a community. So far we're only talking about the living things. So this would be a community of lions and wildebeest and zebras and whatever that's supposed to be. I guess I don't know. It would also include the trees and the grass and that kind of stuff. So all these populations of living things. When we start including the weather, so the non-living factors, we talk about our ecosystems, and those ecosystems are divided into different biomes. So we want to talk about what is a biome. When you put all the biomes together, we get to our planet, which is a biosphere. So the planet Earth is our biosphere. So make sure you know these definitions of how we organize life. Again, here's another glimpse at it. We start with a molecule, we get up to cells, tissues, organs. Then we get to what we're talking about, which are organisms, all the way up through how it all works on our biosphere. Okay, so biomes are determined by a couple things. If we're talking terrestrial or land, so the prefix terra means earth or dirt. So earth biomes or land biomes are determined by their temperature and annual rainfall. And we can look at this graph. If you graph annual precipitation, so average, and average annual temperature on the bottom, we get these categories. And then you can see them again on this graph up here where we find them in our world. So why do we study biomes? Because as our climate is changing, we know that certain organisms can survive, for example, in a temperate seasonal forest. Well, if we start changing that temperature, maybe it gets a little warmer, it gets a little colder there, or rainfall changes, we have a different biome where different organisms survive. So what happens to these organisms as our climate changes? So we need to understand in general what are the parameters of these biomes. Specifically in Minnesota, we are covering several biomes. We kind of fall on the graph right about here. So I do want to talk about terrestrial biomes mostly, but in Minnesota we also have lots of aquatic biomes. Because we don't have to worry about rainfall, these biomes are already in water. Aquatic biomes are defined by how much salt is there, how deep they are, and this depth also determines temperature. So that kind of covers the temperature realm. And then is the water moving or is it stagnant? We will study all of this stuff by looking at some lakes and ponds and streams and rivers around us. And then we also have these saltwater biomes. Intertidal zones and coral reefs have lots of life in them. Super important for ecosystems. When you get out into the open ocean, it is deep, it is dark, there's not a lot of activity happening out here. What's also interesting are this in-between area, especially mangroves. Mangroves are where a lot of baby fish are born. So if we lose our mangroves or if our salt marshes are also kind of a halfway between this freshwater, saltwater, a lot of life starts here. So aquatic biomes super important because there is an ecosystem here of a food chain and all these things that we need to stay alive, as well as on land. What I would like to focus on, I would like for you to pick a terrestrial biome that interests you. I also would like to focus on biomes in Minnesota because this is where we live. A lot of you will probably be nice to your parents and stay in Minnesota. They're going to want to watch your kids grow up. So let's learn about where we live. So the Minnesota biome's right there. And again, an ecosystem, again, it's an interaction of all living and non-living things. So living things in that physical world, so the rocks and the weather and the water around them. And then a biome would be a collection of related ecosystems. So ecosystems and then how they all work together is what we call a biome. So what I would like for you to do right now, there's a worksheet where you have to graph rainfall and temperature and try to figure out which biome I've given you just to practice some graphing. And then I want you to pick a biome that interests you and simply sign up to do some research. We'll talk about that when you're in class. Bye.